Dr. Mark Johnson had always considered himself an optimist. A pragmatic one, sure, after all, he was a scientist, not a dreamer. But as the shuttle descended through the dense atmosphere of Oma'kai, streaking past glistening waves that stretched into infinity, he couldn't help but feel a spark of something greater. This was a historic moment. For the first time, humanity had been invited to participate in an interstellar cultural exchange, a test to prove their adaptability among the stars. Hundreds of species in the Galactic Accord had debated whether humanity could integrate into the greater cosmic society. They were survivors, yes, but adaptability could be both a gift and a curse. Could humans learn to live within the strict ecological and societal balances that many civilizations held sacred? This experiment would answer that question. The pelarins, an aquatic species with bioluminescent, eel-like forms, had selected Johnson as Earth's first ambassador. In return, their own chosen representative, Vorthal, would live among humans on Earth. The idea was to observe and learn two species trading environments, struggling against unfamiliar biology, culture, and ecosystems, all to prove that cohabitation was possible. It was an honor. It was also a massive risk. Johnson exhaled as the shuttle hummed beneath his boots, signaling the final approach. He glanced at the quarantine measures listed on his forearm display. Biological sterilization complete. Nanofilter scan, 99.999% effectiveness. Atmospheric compatibility, oxygen 78, nitrogen 21, trace 1. Acceptable. He had done everything right. His body had been scrubbed, his microbiome examined, every possible contaminant removed. He was clean, or so he thought. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, and Johnson stepped into a shallow landing pool where several pelarins waited. Vorthal was the first to greet him, his elongated, iridescent body rippling as he moved through the water. He had a voice like shifting tides, an eerie mimicry of human speech. "Mark Johnson," he said, "welcome to Oma'kai." Johnson smiled. "Glad to be here, my friend." The others behind Vorthal were larger, their bodies adorned with flowing bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in mesmerizing sequences, an advanced form of nonverbal communication. They were the Polarin's elders, the keepers of knowledge, and the ones who would decide if Johnson's presence was a blessing or a disaster. "You enter our world as a guest," one of them said, his deep tones reverberating through the water like a song. "We ask only that you observe, learn, and tread carefully." "I understand," Johnson replied. "I'll do my best to respect your world." Respect. He meant it. He truly did. But respect wouldn't be enough. Oma'kai was breathtaking. Johnson's biodome, a transparent sphere set atop a floating platform, was designed to simulate Earth-like conditions while allowing him to observe the aquatic world beneath. From here he could descend into the depths in a specially crafted exosuit, one that filtered oxygen from the water and allowed him to move freely among the pelarins. And move he did. Each day, Johnson joined Vorthal in exploring the alien reefs, marveling at the shimmering shoals of Tiverii, delicate, translucent fish that wove through coral forests like living streams of light. The pelarins had no concept of agriculture or livestock. Instead, they relied on a symbiotic relationship with the ocean itself. Microscopic organisms, invisible to the human eye, formed the backbone of their ecosystem. Some provided nutrition, breaking down minerals into digestible forms. Others functioned as biological filters, ensuring the balance of their waters. There were no predators here, no competition, no struggle for dominance. Every species existed in a careful, harmonious cycle. Johnson found it fascinating and dangerous. Back on Earth, life was warfare. Every microbe, every species had evolved in brutal competition, constantly adapting, fighting for survival. Humanity itself was proof of that adaptability. But here, on Oma'kai, there had been no such struggle. The Pelarin biosphere had never faced invasive threats. It had never needed to evolve defenses against foreign organisms. It was pure. And that purity was fragile. It started small. Johnson had been careful. Every time he entered the ocean, his exosuit was sanitized. His biodome was an isolated environment, separated from the Pellerin ecosystem. There were quarantine measures, redundancies, backups for the backups. But life always found a way. One day, while exploring a coral structure, Johnson removed his glove to examine a delicate, glowing anemone-like organism. A single drop of his sweat touched the water. A microscopic exchange. By the time Johnson realized what had happened, it was already too late. The Deathworlders were the first to die. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a few corpses drifting lazily through the current. But soon, more appeared. Within days, entire shoals collapsed, their bodies bloated, their translucent forms darkened by strange, alien infections. The Pellerins noticed but did not panic. Natural cycles had downturns, they reasoned. But Johnson saw the pattern immediately. He ran tests, cultures, samples, DNA sequencing. And then he saw it. Escherichia coli. Not a disease. Not a virus. Just human gut bacteria, a harmless passenger in his body, a survivor from Earth. Here, on Oma'kai, it had no competition. No natural checks. The microflora of the Pellerin ecosystem had never encountered anything like it. And so it spread. Deathworlders, the planet's most vital filter feeders, were being wiped out, unable to process the sudden invasion in their delicate systems. And without them, larger species began to starve. The cascading effect was unstoppable. Johnson, horrified, worked day and night, trying to find a way to stop it. But adaptability was a curse as well as a gift. The bacteria mutated, thriving in ways he had never anticipated. It began feeding on native microbes, devouring entire populations that the Pellerins relied upon for digestion and respiration. Their immune systems were unprepared. The Deathworlders population collapsed within a week. By the second week, larger species began to disappear. By the third week, Pellerin elders convened in fear, whispering the unthinkable. Had humanity just doomed an entire planet? Vorthal, still stationed on Earth, sent a desperate message across the stars. You must leave. But Johnson refused. This is my fault, he told the elders. I have to fix it. The elders were less certain. Some saw Johnson as a walking contagion, a being whose very presence was destroying their world. Others, including Vorthal, still believed in diplomacy. But time was running out. One of the elders, a wise being named Oma'kai, loomed before Johnson in the depths of the coral chamber, his bioluminescence dim with worry. You have shown us something we have never known before, Oma'kai said. The power of unrestrained survival. Johnson met his gaze. And I'll find a way to make it right. The elder's expression darkened. You may not have the chance. Above them, the ocean was changing. A new bacterial bloom, a mutation of Johnson's microbes, had begun to choke the waters. And for the first time in millennia, the Pellerin people felt the stirrings of a word they had never needed before. Extinction. The ocean was dying. Dr. Mark Johnson watched from the reinforced walls of his biodome, horror creeping into his bones. The crystalline waters of Oma'kai, once a paradise of glowing reefs and endless shimmering waves, had turned cloudy, choked with death. The once abundant Deathworlders, the planet's delicate filter feeders, were gone. Bloated corpses drifted like ghostly remnants of a vanished world, their translucent bodies clouded with alien bacterial infections. And without them, the rest of the ecosystem was collapsing. The Pellerin elders, once diplomatic and composed, were now divided. Some demanded Johnson's immediate execution, believing that his very presence was a curse upon their world. Others, including the ambassador Vorthal, still clung to the hope that humanity's knowledge could undo the damage. But hope was running out. Johnson had been fighting for days without sleep, trying to devise a solution, but the bacteria he had introduced, unintentionally, unthinkingly, had evolved beyond his control. It had learned to thrive. And now, it was beginning to mutate. A desperate emergency meeting was called in the Grand Chamber of the Elders, a cavernous space deep beneath the ocean's surface. Johnson stood in a circular arena, surrounded by the towering Pellerin elders, their bioluminescent bodies flickering with barely concealed rage and fear. Vorthal, floating beside him, was visibly distressed, his normally fluid movements jerky with stress. The High Elder, Surakai, loomed above Johnson. His glow was dim, a sign of deep sorrow. "You have brought an unseen predator into our waters," Surakai said. "You have shattered the balance that has existed for millennia." Johnson gritted his teeth. He knew that. He knew it better than anyone. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, voice hoarse. "But I can fix it." Another elder, one of the more aggressive council members, lashed his long tail through the water with a crack like a whip. "You have said this before, human. And yet, the tides darken. The creatures die. Our children grow weak. How much longer must we suffer your fixes?" The assembled elders hissed in agreement, their lights pulsing in synchronized fury. Johnson glanced at Vorthal, desperate. The Pellerin ambassador turned toward his people. "Elders, we must let the human try. We do not have the knowledge to combat this crisis." "But they do." A long silence followed. Finally, Surakai's gaze bore into Johnson's, deep and unreadable. "You will have one final chance, Mark Johnson," the High Elder said. "But if your solution fails, you will be cast into the abyss." Johnson swallowed hard. The abyss was not a metaphor. The deepest trench in Oma'kai's oceans, a place of perpetual darkness and crushing pressure, where exiles were sent to die. No one had ever returned from it. Johnson rushed back to his lab, barely stopping for breath. If he was going to stop this, he needed to think like the very thing he had unleashed. The bacteria had come from his own microbiome, Escherichia coli, one of Earth's most common gut bacteria. It was never meant to be harmful. But in the pristine, competition-free waters of Oma'kai, it had become something else. Something predatory. It was consuming native microbes, hijacking the Pellerin biome, and replacing it with an ecosystem that wasn't supposed to exist here. It was rewriting the planet's biology in real time. And it was happening fast. Johnson ran simulations, sequencing samples from the infected waters. The results were terrifying. The bacteria had already evolved into 4 distinct strains, each more aggressive than the last. One had even begun breaking down Pellerin organic matter, something no Earth bacterium should have been able to do. If it wasn't stopped now, it wouldn't just kill the Tverii. It would consume the entire Pellerin biosphere. The answer came in the darkest hours of the night, when Johnson, exhausted and on the edge of despair, made a leap of faith. If evolution was the enemy, then evolution had to be the solution. He needed to outcompete the invasive bacteria with something just as aggressive. The phage. Viruses that attacked bacteria had existed on Earth for billions of years. If he could engineer a hyper-specialized bacteriophage, it could infect and destroy the invasive strains without harming the native Pellerin microbiome. It was dangerous. If the phage mutated out of control, it could wipe out all microbial life in the ocean, including the essential microbes that the Pellerins needed to survive. But if he did nothing, there wouldn't be a Pellerin civilization left to save. Vorthal was the first to understand what Johnson was proposing. "You wish to introduce a counter-organism? Another foreign entity? It's our only shot," Johnson said. "If we let this bacteria keep mutating unchecked, it'll destroy everything. The phage is the only thing that can keep up with it." Surakai and the elders were less convinced. "You ask us to trust that another one of your creations will not become a new plague upon our world?" "I know it's risky," Johnson admitted, "but if we do nothing, you won't have a world left to protect." Another long silence. Then, Surakai spoke. "Very well. But know this, human, if you fail, we will end this ourselves." Johnson didn't ask what that meant. Standing at the edge of the biodome, Johnson held a vial containing the phage, his heart hammering in his chest. This was it. He turned to Vorthal. If this works, your people live. And if it fails? Johnson exhaled. Then we're both dead. Without another word, he released the first batch into the water. At first, there was nothing. Then, within hours, the water changed. Under a microscope, Johnson watched as the engineered phage latched onto the invasive E. coli, injecting viral DNA, hijacking its replication process, and obliterating it from the inside out. The war had begun. Day by day, the red tides receded. The clouds of dead organisms cleared. The bacteria were being hunted. But the phage wasn't just destroying the invaders. It was breaking them down, converting their organic material into nutrients that the native Pellerin microbiome could reclaim. It was a reset button. A miracle. By the end of the third week, the ecosystem stabilized. The Pellerin people survived. But they were not the same. The phage had permanently altered the microbial life of Oma'kai. The Devarii would recover, but slowly. The coral forests had been scarred. And the Pellerins themselves, once immune to all disease, now faced the reality of infection for the first time in their history. Johnson had saved them. But he had also changed them forever. When Johnson stood before the elders once more, he already knew what their judgment would be. "You are banished from our world," Surakai said. "Humanity is not ready to walk among the stars." Johnson nodded, accepting the sentence. He had proven humanity's adaptability. And in doing so, he had doomed their place in the Galactic Accord. As Johnson boarded the shuttle, preparing to leave Oma'kai forever, Vorthal spoke one last time. "You have saved us, Mark Johnson." His glow flickered dimly. But at what cost? Johnson had no answer. As the shuttle lifted away, he watched the ocean shrink below him, knowing he would never see it again. But the consequences of his actions would ripple across the galaxy. Forever. The shuttle drifted through the cold void, silent save for the soft hum of the departure engines. Dr. Mark Johnson sat in the sterile confines of the isolation chamber, staring out at the shrinking planet below. Oma'kai. It was still beautiful. The damage he had caused wasn't visible from orbit. The waters shimmered under the light of the system's twin suns, the vast ocean stretching like an unbroken jewel. From up here, it was easy to believe that nothing had changed. But he knew better. The ecosystem had survived, just barely. The engineered phage had successfully eliminated the invasive Earth bacteria before they could consume the Pellerin biosphere entirely. The collapse had been halted. The red tides had faded. But at a cost. The Pellerins were no longer immune to disease. Their symbiotic ecosystem, once pristine and untouched by evolution's brutal hands, had been forced to change. And now, so had their way of life. Johnson's mission had proven humanity's adaptability, just as the Galactic Accord had wanted. But it had also proven their danger. He was the first human to be formally banished from an alien world. And now, the galaxy was watching. As Johnson's shuttle reached the rendezvous station, his escort team from the Galactic Accord was already waiting. They did not greet him. The towering insectoid diplomat known as Jikroa, representing the Accord's Council of Ecological Integrity, observed Johnson through the reinforced quarantine barrier. "You have done what no other species has accomplished in 1,000 years, human," Jikroa said, voice clicking in eerie, deliberate tones. "You have single-handedly altered the biological trajectory of an entire planet." Johnson sighed. "I saved them." "You altered them," Jikroa corrected. "The Pellerins were a species that had never known sickness. Now they must contend with microbial war. You have introduced competition to a species that had never needed to evolve defenses. In your desperation to undo your mistake, you have forced them into a new era of existence." "I know." Johnson's voice was flat. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "No species means to destroy a world," Jikroa said. "But they often do." The pause. Then, Jikroa's antennae twitched. The Accord has reached a decision. Johnson already knew what was coming. Humanity's status in the interstellar community is revoked. Effective immediately. Johnson exhaled slowly. "We will not interfere with your species' progress," Jikroa continued. We will not attack you. We will not isolate you entirely. But you won't trust us, Johnson finished. No, Jikroa confirmed. We will watch. Johnson's return to Earth was not triumphant. There was no hero's welcome. No celebrations. He was debriefed, interrogated, and then quietly shuffled into obscurity. The interstellar exchange program, once hailed as humanity's great diplomatic breakthrough, was officially shut down. The Pellerin experiment had been too great a failure. For the first time since achieving interstellar travel, humans were alone again. And the consequences of that exile spread like wildfire. Governments across Earth scrambled to respond. Some blamed Johnson outright, calling him a reckless scientist who had cost humanity its place in the stars. Others defended him, arguing that he had done what any scientist would. He had tried to fix a mistake. But the Galactic Accord's message was clear. Humanity was not ready. Diplomatic channels closed. Trade negotiations evaporated. Plans for colonization, research agreements, and interstellar cooperation halted overnight. And with that came something new. If humanity could accidentally devastate an entire ecosystem, what would happen if they entered the galactic stage at full strength? What if their survivalist instincts weren't an accident but an inevitability? For the first time, the galaxy saw humanity for what it truly was. A force of nature, a biological wildfire. And wildfires had to be contained. Months passed. Johnson, now stripped of his title, his work buried in classified reports, had retreated into quiet exile. Until one day, a familiar voice reached out through a secure, unauthorized transmission. Fourth, Johnson, the Pellerin ambassador's voice was subdued, solemn. I wish I could say things are as they once were. But they are not. Johnson leaned forward. What's happening? The elders still debate your actions, Vorthal admitted. Many now believe you were not an agent of destruction, but a warning. A glimpse of a universe we had not yet been forced to understand. Johnson frowned. You're saying they what? They don't hate me anymore? Vorthal hesitated. Fear? Perhaps. But fear can be the seed of growth. A long silence. Finally, Vorthal spoke again. There are some among us who believe humanity should not be exiled. That you should be guided, not abandoned. Johnson's pulse quickened. But we are only a minor voice within the Accord, Vorthal admitted. And the elders still decree that no human may set foot on Oma'kai again. Johnson exhaled. I never expected to. Vorthal hesitated. Perhaps. But the Accord will not ignore you forever. What you have done cannot be undone. Humanity has entered the story of the stars. Even if the door has been closed, your kind will find another way in. Another silence. Then one final message. Survival is not the same as coexistence, Vorthal said softly. And one day, your people will have to choose which matters more. The transmission cut out. And Johnson was alone again. Though diplomatic channels remained severed, whispers spread across the galaxy. Humanity had proven itself too dangerous for peaceful integration, but it had also proven itself too adaptable to be ignored. And while the Galactic Accord feared the damage humanity could cause, some began to wonder if they could survive the coming centuries without them. Because the universe was not a peaceful place. Beyond the Accord's protected borders, other civilizations existed. Ruthless ones. Predatory ones. Species that had thrived on war and conquest, not harmony. If the Accord continued to isolate humanity, what would happen if someone else didn't? Johnson knew that Earth would never stay isolated forever. It was only a matter of time. The next time humans ventured into the stars, they would be prepared. More careful, perhaps, but also more determined. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of. And the next time they met, it would not be as guests. It would be as equals. Or worse, as competitors. As Johnson stared out into the night sky, he wondered which future would come first. And whether the galaxy would be ready for it.